Hello. Welcome to Westport StoryFest. My name is Meg Flynn. I'm the co-owner of Black Rock Books in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and I'm here to moderate the panel Peekaboo, I See You, Inclusivity in Children's Literature. And with me are a bunch of lovely Connecticut-based authors. So we have Sally Pla, who's the author of The Someday Birds, Stanley Will Probably Be Fine, The Fire, the Water, and Maudie McGuinn. We have Sivan Hong at the end. She's the author of the super fun daybook series. It's made for neurodiverse kids and printed with dyslexic-friendly fonts, which is really awesome and cool. Dan Poblacki, who's the author of Tales to Keep You Up at Night, and also the co-author of The Magic Misfits with Neil Patrick Harris. We have Lorianne Lawrence, who's the author of the Fright Watch series, and she has a new book coming out next fall, right?
I think it got put.
Oh, it got put, so sorry. She's got one coming soon. And then Janae Marks, who's the author of From the Desk of Zoe Washington, On Air with Zoe Washington, and A Soft Place to Land. And you have a new book coming out next year, too?
That is next fall.
Okay, great. So yeah, I just want to quickly open up with, just sort of an explanation of why inclusivity in children's literature is so important. There's a great TED Talk by Grace Lynn, who's a children's author. She wrote A Big Mooncake for Little Star. I think this came out in like 2016 or so, but she she spoke about how children's books can be mirrors and also be windows. So we can see ourselves reflected in a book, and we can also see others' experiences, a window into someone else's life. And your bookshelf, or your child's bookshelf, should hopefully reflect a little bit of both. You should be able to see you and see how, other people experience the world. And I just, on that note, let's jump right in. Does anyone have, why is inclusivity in children's literature important to each of you?
I can start if you want to go down. So for me, that whole concept of windows and mirrors is exactly, I think, why it's important to me. I think when I look back to when I was a kid and reading, I was, an avid reader as a kid, but I often did not really see a lot of books featuring girls that looked like me on the cover unless it was a certain kind of story, like a story that was maybe around, like slavery or, things like that. To see, in the contemporary, literature that I usually like to read, I was not normally the main character, somebody who looks like me. And I think, at the time I didn't really think about it too much because that was kind of the norm in the 90s. But now, I think as you see more and more of these books being published, featuring all kinds of kids on the cover, all kinds of kids as the main character, having the adventures, you see how much it really can make kids feel seen and feel like could be the heroes of their own stories. And I think it's not only about them seeing themselves, but I think the window is so important too. Being able to see other kinds of people around you, because our world is a really diverse place, and it just feels wrong to not have our books portraying that same level of diversity that exists in our country and the world. In my books, it's not like every single book that I write is always about I'm trying to share some pocket of diversity, but I think, the kinds of stories that I share, I hope give kids a chance to either see themselves or a little window into what other kids might be experiencing. And hopefully it builds empathy and understanding and makes kids feel less alone in their experiences.
Yeah, I feel like the empathy piece is, I'm trying to remember, they said to hold it like an ice cream cone yesterday, right? I don't know how you hold an ice cream cone. The empathy piece, I feel like, is really, really important. And I feel like I look at it with two lenses, like three. The author lens, the reader lens, and then also I'm a middle school teacher, some of my students are here. That lens as well. And we need to be reading books about all different kinds of people, and that helps people to feel more empathetic with their peers, with people they don't know, et cetera. And Janae referenced the 90s, and I do have nostalgia for a lot of like that pulp horror stuff that R.L. Stine, all that came out in the 90s that I used to gobble up. But at the same time, if you reread some of them, there's like a lot of fat shaming, there's no diversity at all, and they really make fun of mental health, which is a big thing that I like to write about, especially anxiety disorders. And I feel like we've kind of come a long way, but there's way more that we need to do with our books.
Yeah, those are all really great points. For me, I think that that stories are probably the best way to get at increased awareness and acceptance and familiarity with all the different kinds of kids and people that there are. Stories are the way that you can best sort of slip inside the skin of another character and think their thoughts and feel the world through them. And for kids, it's really important, I think, to be able to do that and then talk about it. Books are just such a great way through to talking about these things, whether in a classroom or in a family. You can sit down and say, why do you think they felt that way in the story? And it takes it away from the personal, and it makes you be able to talk about a character. And that somehow diffuses it a little bit and makes it safe and allows children to experience the world in important ways and expand their ideas of what it's like to be human.
I mean,
That's it.
I don't know if I have too much more to add to this particular question, except that in my experience over the years, receiving emails and letters from readers and parents of readers, young readers, thanking me for writing the kinds of books that I've written. They have sort of allowed me to see that there's a power that I didn't know I was capable of sharing when I first started writing, and the impact that a book can really have on a young reader, like, can change their life. It can not only like help them see themselves and recognize and build empathy, but also sort of overcome some things in their lives that they didn't even know they were struggling with.
You guys didn't leave me a lot. But I think the kinds of books that I write are about differences that you can't see, because these are kids who are neurodivergent, and you can't tell that somebody has ADHD by just looking at them, or if they're autistic by just looking at them. And it allows that conversation to happen with kids who are really, really young, to say that just because somebody may look like you doesn't mean that the way they feel inside is the same way you feel. And it normalizes that difference, which is so powerful.
And on that note of normalizing differences, if you're a child who is neurotypical and you've never read a book where a neurodiverse child is represented, how are you supposed to then have empathy for that person who might be sitting next to you in class? It's all about opening up the realm of possibility and building that empathy. And I think stories are a great way to do that, because you can do it from the safety of your library or your home. Thinking about the neurodiversity in the books that you write, and also I think in Sally, in a lot of your books, and then the mental health piece being represented, can any of you speak a little bit more on like what called you to that issue in particular and why that's... Sally's giving me the eyes like, yes, I can definitely talk about that. So why don't you jump in?
Yeah, I have 3 neurodivergent sons, one who is diagnosed autistic at 10 after a big, long journey with it. And when I started writing my first book, which was kind of like a heart gift to him and to all of our family sort of struggles, I ended up in therapy and then ended up going to get tested and ended up with an autism diagnosis myself. So it just made so many things click into place for me. It was life-changing, and I've only really even been able to talk about it for the past few years, because for a while I wasn't sure how to talk about it. But yeah, it's become my mission, really, because all of my books feature kids whose brains work a little bit differently, who all show aspects of being on the spectrum, or who have learning challenges, because these are my heart people. I love these. Every main character to me feels like my child, and I love them, and I want the world to love them, and I want kids to really be able to read these characters and feel like, yeah, I feel that way too. I feel anxious, I feel scared, I get sensory overload, because these are human things that happen to all of us, right? It's just a matter of degree. If you have a diagnosis, it's to the point where it affects the happiness of your life and your ability to survive. But all of us have these issues that we deal with. And for kids to read about autistic kids dealing with, things that they deal with, and then be able to talk about it and say, oh, okay, I understand, or now I understand about my classmate, and just to be able to have that be there is so important to me. It's like massively important to me.
I can kind of add on to that a little bit. Like, I grew up with an anxiety disorder, but I didn't know what it was when I was a kid because it was not really something we talked about with my generation. But through the years, something magical has been happening that I'm noticing as a teacher and as a parent. We have more language for different types of mental illness, and it's not like there's not like a stigma as much attached to it. And I think it's really important that kids can, come to school and feel safe telling a teacher or a counselor or a parent or whoever, like, that they're having these feelings and that it can be really scary and they don't know, and it's just like anything else. You just need strategies. Like, if I teach you how to write an essay, I'm giving you strategies on how to do that step by step. If you have, a mental illness or something like depression or anxiety disorder, et cetera, there are strategies that can help you manage your symptoms. And I feel like giving language is really, really important, and letting kids see characters who are dealing with these things, but also are happy and successful and have friends and have supportive parents or whatever it is also really important to help take away that stigma.
So Sally and I have lived parallel lives in many ways because it was through the diagnosis of both of our kids becoming or recognizing their neurodivergence that we then figured out that we were also neurodivergent. So in that way, very similar story. But for me, I couldn't find picture books to show my kids that their differences were okay at the time where I started writing them. So I had a son in kindergarten who's autistic and needed to wear headphones and refused to wear headphones to school because it was different and he didn't want to get picked on. And I was looking everywhere for a picture book for me to be like, no, see the kid in this book? He's just like you. He wears headphones. It's okay for you to wear headphones. And I decided that I needed to create that book because it didn't exist, because I didn't want other parents to have to go out and face that challenge. And since then, I've gotten lovely emails from parents saying that now their kid is okay wearing headphones in their classroom because they see this character in this book who's just like them, who wears headphones, and that's okay. And it's actually a little cool.
I love that idea that, like, you create the change that you want to see. You see a gap, and so you naturally are drawn to fill it. And how lucky for you all that you're talented writers. So you can. I wanted to go back a bit to a piece of what Janae said earlier, which is that when you see yourself represented in books, I think it encourages children to read more. And, on that note, when you created the character of Zoe Washington, one of the pieces in the first book is that she finds out her biological father is incarcerated, which is an experience that I think far more children in the United States have than don't have. But I don't think I have, certainly not when I was growing up in the 90s, encountered a book that brought that up. So what's the kind of feedback that you get from readers when they read Zoe Washington?
Yeah, so I what you're saying is absolutely right in terms of it's more kids than you would think, because when I was researching the book, I saw a statistic that said that 1 in every 27 children has a parent in prison in the United States. So if you think about it, that could be on average 1 kid in every classroom. So, it's not my personal experience, but I know that it's definitely, I've talked to people, in writing the book, and it's been their experience as, as a kid, and they shared, like there is a stigma attached to it. I think there's a lot of kids who feel really ashamed and don't want to talk about it. And so the feedback that I've gotten, I think the best is when, I'll do a school visit or something like that, and a kid will come up and be like, oh, like I have a parent, in prison. And it's like, I think that it's just nice to know, or a teacher will say, I was especially excited to give this to this particular student because they are dealing with this at home right now, and it like makes them feel, like less alone in that experience. So I think, it is something that I thought about when writing this book, that I had this idea and I was like, you know what? I was like looking up other middle grade books that feature this dynamic, and there are definitely a few, but just not a ton. And so I was like, I feel like this is something that could be useful for kids out there. So that was essentially my inspiration for that.
Yeah, I think stigma is a really good word to bring into the conversation, because with what you're talking about, and also in the neurodiversity piece, stigma is huge. And again, like it's about offering those windows to give children a perspective into a world that might not be like theirs, but helps to normalize it. This is a very timely conversation, but my next question was going to be, what barriers have you encountered in the publishing world in getting these stories out there? Because as we're saying, they're not typical stories, or it's been a change.
I mean, I'd like to speak to this because I'm queer, I'm genderqueer, and I really felt when I first started writing books for young people, I could not really put those aspects of my own life into the stories I was telling for quite some time, and only recently have I felt brave enough to put a non-binary character into one of my books and have same-sex parents. So I'm leaning more into it now, which is ironic because of the pushback that queer representation is getting from so many groups here in the United States. But I think that's why it's important, more so now than ever, that publishers stand up to these groups. I'm not saying the quiet part out loud right now, but we know who we're talking about. And they are one of my publishers, and I think, it has been a barrier early on, and I see it changing. And whenever there's that swing towards a change, there's going to be a pushback against that change, and that's kind of what I'm experiencing right now. Thankfully, I have some other publishers who are unbelievably supportive. So keep it up.
In that vein, I want to ask each of you, what can publishers, we know what we want publishers to be doing. How can readers support you? How can booksellers support you? How can libraries support you in getting these books out there and making sure that they're getting into the hands of kids who need to see them?
I can chime in because I was actually on a panel last week that was all about censorship in Connecticut, specifically book banning in Connecticut. And one of the takeaways that we hoped that the people at that panel would take from us is that we really need all readers, in our cases, the parents, the educators, librarians, to support in pushing back against the challenges that books like ours are getting. If you can show up to your local school board or library board meetings anytime, but also especially if you hear about a book being challenged, so that you can share that other voice saying, actually, this is why I think it should stay on shelves. Because a lot of times at these meetings, only the people who want the books to be banned have the loudest voices in these meetings most of the time. And actually, I think they were saying that only maybe 11 people total in the country are really what's behind this whole resurgence of book banning, and that's not a lot of people. So if everybody else were to come to these meetings and actually start, or speak to their schools and libraries and say, hey, what is your policy around book banning? Like, can we make sure that we have a policy in place? We all need to kind of do that work. And then beyond that, supporting books featuring diversity, featuring marginalized, either by marginalized authors or featuring all kinds of diversity in them, support them on your own, go to the bookstores and buy them yourself, because there's a good chance that it might not be at your library, or it might not be at a lot of libraries across the country. And so we gotta, I think the publishers, even if they're supportive, there's only so much that they can do, I guess. If people are not shelving our books in certain parts of the country, there's not really much that the publisher can do about that. I do wish that publishers, like, I'm just gonna say it, Scholastic, would push back. I have no shame. No, I wish they would stand up against, I think that some of them do need to actually not go backwards and make policies that make it easier for people to ban books, but I know that there's only so much they can do if a librarian chooses just not to carry it for all kinds of reasons. So it's a big issue, but support us, by... Yeah,
and I'm going to speak to parents, just because I have had, from the author perspective, going to, and I know Dan and I were talking about this, not in terms of inclusivity, but horror in general, because that's what we write, kids horror, mostly. So we've both gotten at book festivals, parents come up where a kid literally has our book in their hand and says, can I have this book? And the parents are like, no, that's too intense for you, or that's too scary for you. And it's like, English teacher over here is like, your kid wants to read. Like, buy them whatever book they want if you have the means, or take them to the library and let them choose whatever book they want. As an English teacher, if a kid wants to read whatever, let them. It is only going to help them become a better human and a reader, which will help them in every other aspect of their life. And I'm just gonna go out there and say, if your kid has a phone, you're not probably censoring everything they're doing on there. Like, you're not shutting down Google. So they can see whatever they want. And a lot of times my students tell me, oh, I just watched The Exorcist last night. But I can't read that book. Or a parent will say, oh, I don't like that book. It's like, I don't know. Yeah.
Can I just add one more thing? I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. To go along with that, I've also seen parents, and I love parents. I love my parents. I love supportive parents, and I love that parents are constantly evolving and learning themselves. Mm-hmm. I have also seen parents sort of steer gender away from a certain book. And like Lorian said, let your kids read what they want to read, like, just because it's a sports book doesn't mean somebody shouldn't be able to read that. Or just because it is a book with a pink cover doesn't mean somebody shouldn't be able to read that. Yeah, that's my 2 cents.
And just to chime in, sorry, just also trust the age categories that are on the books. Like, I feel like people are like, oh, this is inappropriate, but like, we specifically write the books for ages 8 to 12 or from ages 0 to 5, whatever it is. Even if it touches upon that subject matter, we try to do so in a very age-appropriate manner. Okay, that was it. Go ahead.
I think at the end of the day, it's buy the books, right? Because if you buy the books, they will keep publishing them. Books on neurodiversity represent less than 1% of all children's books published. And yet we know that the population of neurodiverse kids is way higher than that. So if you buy the books, they will keep publishing them.
Yeah, and to kind of bridge off of the conversation about parents and how, we are very concerned about censorship at large, and a kind of scary moment that we're all in right now with that. But there's also this like more casual censorship that I see all the time when parents come into my bookstore. And it's awkward because I'm not gonna tell you how to raise your kid. I have my own kid, I'll raise him, but a child who picks up a book and the parent is like, well, I want you to read a real book, not a graphic novel. Well, but if a child is excited to read something, shouldn't we encourage that? Because we want our kids to read, we want them to develop this skill. So if you could each say, what would you say to a parent who's gonna put your book down?
I would say let the kid read the book and then ask your child what they thought about the book. Maybe your child will say, well, I didn't like it, or this part was scary, or this part was cool, and have a discussion about it. Put it in a context for your child, and that's your chance as a parent, to share some values and some thoughts. I mean, it is a big, scary world with a ton of information. Look at what they're watching on television. That was like such a great point. Look at what they're looking at their phone. It is ridiculous if kids can watch The Exorcist, but their parents say, don't buy the Goosebumps book. I mean, the world just is, you have to have conversations with your kid. You cannot ban things from your child. The world will come in. What you need to do as a parent, I think, is just have conversations with your child. What do you think about this?
And you know what? Maybe have the parent read the book too, because there are going to be things in that book that, as somebody, I grew up in the 70s, those things didn't exist back then. And so I can learn something by reading it too.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I was going to say, how about you read the book with your child? You guys can read it together, and maybe it'll foster conversation. If you're uncomfortable about something as the parent that pops up, like that could be a conversation you have with your kid and really discuss, what your thoughts about it. And just, that's the whole point of reading, is to kind of share as community. So read with your kids.
Yeah. I love that idea. A parent-child book club is an opportunity to facilitate conversations and provoke learning at home. I'm backing up in the conversation a little bit to, again, another piece that you talked about, Janae, earlier, where the only books that you saw yourself represented in as a child were about slavery, and the importance of having books that also show characters who are racially diverse or neurodiverse or genderqueer not being in conflict, but also having fun. And enjoying themselves. And if you each could speak on what's the value of including a book like that in a child's bookshelf?
I'm sorry, I just have to say real quick, that was the whole motivation for me, because every book seemed to be, if it was about disability, it was what we call inspiration porn. Basically, this poor disabled child, or this poor, othered child in whatever way. The main characters learn from the child to be better people, and that's the reason. Or there are picture books that are like, my brother Johnny has, this problem and that problem, and it's a catalog of pathologies, and then it's like, but we love him anyway. And I just wanted to get away from that so bad and write books for kids where it's just a kid having an adventure, just a regular, just like any other kid, having an adventure, going through all kinds of challenges in the world, and just, being a human kid. So
these books have an opportunity to break stereotypes. So kind of in neurodiversity, all we see in the media is a really smart white boy. That's it, right? And we can think of many of them. And so there's a huge gap between girls of color and white boys in terms of their diagnoses. And that means there's a huge gap in terms of how much services and support girls of color get in relation to white boys. So I made sure that I showed an autistic girl of color in my book, because if we can start making people aware that this isn't just something that happens to really, really smart white boys, then maybe people will start being able to see that these kids also need the support that they should get.
I was just gonna, as an aside, there were a couple other books besides slavery books that feature kids, but a lot of times they were minor characters. So I loved the Babysitters Club, for example, in the 90s, and there was one character, but she wasn't the main one. And I feel like, again, it just kind of became this subconscious thing that I'm consuming media where it's like, you're always the side character, you're always not the main character. And I think that kind of showed itself in my writing early on, because when I first started writing stories and my first books that never got published, I did not feature, I sort of wrote about white kids, like, or white people, because it honestly didn't even occur to me to write about a person that looked like me, because I was like, well, that's not what's publishing, like, that's not what I'm seeing. And then, like, with We Need Diverse Books, like, kind of being really vocal, and they came together, this organization, to kind of share why diversity is important. I started to realize, like, oh, I need to, like, in my own head, realize that I can write a character that looks like me. And I like to joke, because I think I described Zoe so close to looking like me that she really does look like me. They're like, is that you? And I'm like, no, I think I really just described her so close to me, because I think that's what I really wanted. So I think the power is in that. I hope that today's kids can see themselves so much that if they want to be writers, if they want to be anything, that they can see that they can do it too. And I think bringing back the fun part of it, that's why I made her a baker. On the covers, you really see her in these joyful situations, because that's like, yes, she's going through this challenge of having an incarcerated parent, but her life otherwise is so joyful that, that was definitely something I wanted to make very clear in this book.
Yes, so the idea, instead of being the sidekick or, the best friend, she is the main character, and she has a
she's
full...
the one who is solving the mystery.
Yeah.
And, she has her sidekick friend, but she's the one solving the mystery, so, yeah.
Yeah. Just, on that note of other books that you saw yourself in but not centered in, were there other books for any of you that came close to what you were looking for, that inspired you to make... your own stories and make more of this change in publishing? Ooh, crickets.
I mean, very early on, I was probably in my early 20s, so not quite just past the young adult age, but The Perks of Being a Wallflower had, queer characters, and I found that to be very exciting. When I was a teenager looking for books that sort of represented myself, which is it felt so important, because I felt so alone back then. I know things are very different now in terms of how kids are being accepted and the support they're getting in school, but I didn't have support in my school. I was out to a few friends in high school, and those books, I wish that Perks of Being a Wallflower had sort of come out maybe 10 years earlier. I would have felt seen and not as alone and lonely. And I think that's the importance of it. Even David Levithan's Boy Meets Boy, which, came out, like 20 years ago now as well. If it had come out 10 years before that, I would have, flipped out. Just seeing queer characters existing, not lives ending in suicide as so many of the previous generation of books coming out of the 70s and 80s, where there was some kind of conservative, I don't know what that came out of, but we don't want to see queer people dying. We don't want to see queer people hating themselves. So those are two examples, and I know there's many more, but I also wish they had come out 10 years earlier for my benefit.
I love what you said about you wouldn't have felt so lonely if those had come out 10 years earlier, because I think for kids who gravitate towards books are some of our earliest best friends, and they keep us company. If you were, seen in those books, how do you think it would have impacted your life at that time? And that question's open for anyone.
I guess I'll talk about anxiety and mental health in general. Again, I grew up in kind of came of age in the 90s, and everything was a joke. I never liked Friends, but any of you watch Friends? You watch that now, it's not aging well. I don't think it aged well at the time, but that's another story. It's just a lot of jokes about really personal things, at the main character's expense. And I just remember being a really anxious kid, and I have the best parents, but they had no idea what was quote unquote wrong with me. They thought it was just emotional, you're just emotional, or, you know, like we didn't really just have the language. And I really feel the same kind of thing Dan was saying. Like, I wouldn't have felt like a weirdo. I mean, I am a weirdo, but I think in a good way. I've owned that term now, but it was really lonely when you feel like this is just a you problem and no one else is feeling it. And if it starts to show, or the other aspect of it is, again, like really tragic endings. I hate unhappy endings. I really need hope in the stories I read and the stories I write, and I think that comes from how I grew up. And I just really want to see those characters shine or be successful in something. That's why I made Marion, who had, I don't know where the book is, in Unmasked, I made her an artist who's really, really good at art, and that makes her really, really happy. And she's just really uncomfortable in social situations. So it's like multifaceted sides of herself. And I think that would have been important for me to see as a kid.
And this question is for you and Dan. Anxiety, something that has incorporated itself into my life for a very long time. And I find myself gravitating towards horror. And I'm wondering if there's something to that. Could you each speak on that and why?
Yes, I feel like and I see some horror friends in the audience too, I feel like most of us have some kind of level of anxiety. And I think that is a really helpful way, because we were kind of talking about this on a panel yesterday with some students about how horror is really important, and that in terms of stigmas has a stigma. A lot of parents, especially when you write horror for kids, is parents are afraid of it. And sometimes librarians are afraid of it. I had a librarian come up to me at a book festival and say, I don't know, my kids really want horror on the shelves, but I'm afraid that you're gonna be too horror-y, and I don't even know what that means. So I was like, I don't know what to tell you, but it really does help show kids how to be brave, and that you can be brave, and that oftentimes kids are more aware and self-aware than the adults in those situations. And I feel like if you write about really scary things, the world seems a little less scary. We kind of talked yesterday about monsters when you're kids. They're different. The monsters when you're an adult are very different. And I feel like sometimes adults are less ready to take on the real life monsters, whereas kids are like, okay, well, what's that? Let's go investigate. Let's do it. And that's one of the things I love about like writing horror for kids.
Yeah, as for anxiety, I think just on a personal level, a reason that I keep tackling scary stories is because I have so much of it. I have a podcast called Our First Fears, which I started over the summer, where I'm talking to current creators of scary stuff for adults, for kids, and we're talking about the things that scared us when we were children. And one of the most recent episodes, I was speaking with a middle grade horror writer named Ali Malinenko, who wrote Disappearing House and Ghost Girl. And we talk about our anxiety, and we talk about how creating these books has sort of helped us process how to tackle our anxiety. We talk about what anxiety really feels like, and how scary it can be. And you know, in a way, like the monsters from books and horror movies, and you know, even just scary situations, and I think they act as avatars for us to sort of process and defeat. You learn how a character defeats some horrifying thing in a book, and you might not feel so scared about what you're reading in the news every day. You know what I mean? So in that way, it's beneficial for me as a writer, and I'm hoping that the readers are also getting something out of it, and also like seeing yourself in a character, like understanding that, like that whole mirrors thing. There's other people out there dealing with scary things, and there are ways to defeat those scary things.
Yeah, to kind of jump off of that, not only does it give you an outlet for processing anxiety, but like horror in general, when you, I mean, I've always liked scary things. My son loves scary things. He's 3 years old, so you can all come for me later, but like he watched Nightmare Before Christmas recently, and I was like, surely you will be terrified. He loves it. And whatever that reason is, I don't know. It's something that I think when you just see what your kid can handle, they might surprise you, but also knowing that there are tons of kids out there who love horror, and then they can know, I'm actually not that weird for that. Someone else must like this too, because there's a whole book about it.
Yeah, and also learning what your own limits are. I feel like scary stories allow us to do that too. And what safer way to learn what your limits are than by reading a book that you can close up and put back on the shelf and say, no, this isn't for me. Or as a 3-year-old saying like, give me more, Mom,
I have watched Nightmare Before Christmas 10 times this month.
Also, I don't write horror, but from what I gather and I've talked to Lauren about this, is that a lot of times kids, if they read something that is too much for them, either they will close the book or it'll just kind of float through their head and they won't even recognize it, or they won't even absorb it. It's kind of like if you took your younger kid to see the Barbie movie, how they enjoyed all the fun Barbie stuff, but they might have missed all the misogyny talk. They kind of just that went over their head, right? So I feel like it's the same. And so I think that's why what Lauren was saying about just let them read whatever, I think they know how to pause and stop reading when they're uncomfortable, but also a lot of this stuff that you're really worried about, especially, I don't think you need to worry about with kids' books, but if you were, it's like their brain can only visualize so much. That's why it's less scary to read a book that's horror than to watch a horror movie, because they'll actually see the blood and gore. But otherwise, they have to imagine it. And if they can't imagine it, then maybe it's not as scary.
Sure. And to that point, a book is something that can be opened and closed. I think we also need to provide our children opportunities to understand what their limits are. So, if the book isn't resonating with them, again, it's an opportunity as a parent to have a conversation. Okay, we don't have to read this right now. You can read this later. A book is something you can always come back to, or it might mean more to you at a different point in your life. I'm curious if you each want to talk about what feedback you've gotten from readers that has felt really special or important to you, that oh wow, I must be doing something right.
So I didn't really know what I was doing when I became an author. It was not something that was ever on my radar of something to do. I was horrible at writing when I was younger. I was a very bad reader, obviously, because I was not diagnosed and didn't get any help. But so becoming an author was this shock to me. And I was so focused on releasing my first book, which happened to be about Halloween, that I released it in February. And nobody in their right mind should release a Halloween book in February. But the book ended up becoming a bestseller for books about kids with disabilities. And I realized at that point that it wasn't about Halloween, that there was a gap that I was filling in the market, that there was a need. And I got so many emails from parents asking me to release more books that it kind of gratified me and said, okay, I am doing the right thing, even though clearly I didn't know what I was doing. I am doing the right thing. And more recently, I was getting a lot of emails from parents asking me to release my books in Spanish, right? Because even though this is something new in English, it didn't even dawn on me that there was a whole other market of kids out there who needed the same kind of thing. And so thinking about ways of making my books more accessible to more kids has become a thing. And so over the summer, they were released in Spanish, and that was really, really gratifying.
Oh, I can go. Speaking of reading with your kids, I think my favorite emails, besides the ones from the kids themselves who are really excited to read it or maybe feel inspired by what Zoe's doing in the books, but my favorite is when the parents will reach out and say, hey, I read this with my kid and it really brought up some really interesting conversations. We were able to talk about them together, and I'm just thankful that we had this opportunity to do that. And so I think that's why I think it's so great for parents to read with their kids, even all the way up through, I hear from teachers that, kids enjoy read-alouds all the way through like high school. They enjoy hearing people read to them. It doesn't matter how old they are. So you can read out loud together no matter how old your kid is, and it could just really foster a lot of really interesting conversations between you two. So I think those are I just really enjoy. It's just really heartwarming to think about parents and kids around, the country reading my book together. It's just really nice. That is lovely.
I feel like kids are very sweet and very earnest, and they will tell you what they like and what they don't like, very honestly, which is what I love about writing for them. But I have had adults message me or send me emails and say, like, they wish they had, specifically on Mass, that they wish they had that book when they were in middle school or upper elementary school because they felt seen. And these are adults. So I feel like that was a nice, full circle moment for me.
I just had a message this morning from someone that said, Maudie, the character from my latest book, The Fire, the Water, and Maudie McGinn, which is my most vulnerable book and the closest to my own life experience. So I was a little scared about putting that book out. It just came out in July. But it's been resonating with so many people. And this morning, someone wrote me, Maudie has been living rent-free in my head for months. I am recommending her to everyone. And it just made me so happy that people are connecting with the book. It's so validating when it's really especially personal to you. So yeah, it's been kind of cool.
I got an email from a parent several years ago about their child who had been kind of felt left behind in the classroom, probably because of neurodivergence of some kind that was not revealed to me, and was handed one of my books. I think it was The Nightmares, and which was my second book. And the parents told me that this child, who had never read a book before, from front to back, devoured the book, wanted to read it again with their uncle, then went and tracked down my other books and read those over and over as well. And they wanted to thank me for that, which sort of came at the right time because I sort of had a moment at a social gathering, when people ask what you do, and you say, I at that time, I said, I write horror novels for children. And that person responded, there was a person who responded to me, oh, that hurts my heart. And I was like, oh my God, I wish I could share this email with this woman so that they would understand that I'm not trying to hurt anybody's heart. That what books can do, and certain books can do, especially scary books, where queer people are incidental, where, non-binary kids can go on adventures, where any kind of child can exist just as visible. Scary books can help kids get into reading, and isn't that the point of what we're doing? We want to keep kids engaged, and that made me feel really good.
This is making me think that us as readers and us as parents should probably send you guys nice emails more often. Maybe that would be...
Please do. It makes our
Yes,
day.
please.
Oh my gosh.
Well, I will keep that in mind.
I think every author sometimes has this weird imposter syndrome thing going on, and getting those emails really makes a big difference.
Okay, you heard it here first. Support your authors by sending them nice notes. We have a few minutes left for questions. If anyone in the audience has them, there's a mic over there. The lovely.
If you would come to me to ask a question, that would be terrific. While we're waiting, we have books by all of these authors in the Kamansky room for sale, and they will be signing after this. Any questions?
Hi, I'm totally curious, with parents and librarians and teachers being the kind of gatekeepers to your work, and on the other side of that is your readership. I guess I'm curious, is there ever the conversation that you have directly with the children? Is there something you wish you could say, the things that you, like, the kind of reaching across the gulf and seeing, I guess I'm just curious, like, how do you reach your your readership if there are certain kind of stop gaps in between that you have to kind of either navigate or plow through?
Kids email me all the time. They do. Sometimes it's through their teacher if it's through a school system where they're not allowed, or sometimes they just do. There's one boy, my first book came out in 2017 called The Someday Birds, and he read it, and he wanted to ask me about whether Charlie ate anything besides chicken nuggets, or whether his family ever cooked him a nutritious meal. And he's a senior in high school, and we still write back and forth all the time. So I've made some amazing connections with kids through that, and also school visits, which I guess probably all of us do.
Yeah, I was going to say school visits is a really great way. That's something that a lot of authors for our age groups do, and that's one really great way to reach our target audience. But yeah, I mean, otherwise, yeah, it's going to events like this, just trying to be out there, because it is true. It's really sometimes hard to get a chance to actually see your reader in real life. A lot of times you're always interacting on social media and with other adults, so yeah.
It is tricky, like it is, I mean, because school visits, as someone who works in a school, you do have to get approval from every single person in that building, in that district, et cetera, that in certain places, it might be hard for certain authors to get in front of students who would love their books. So I totally agree that like kids will find you. There are, parents who will just take their kids to the library and let them pick whatever, but you are a little more limited than adult or even YA with being able to interact with them directly.
Hi, I am a parent of young kids still, but I feel like I have spent countless hours scouring the bowels of Bezos to try to find books on empathy, books to help my kids be more well-rounded humans. What is your advice for parents like me who don't want to be maybe on the internet at 1 o'clock in the morning looking to try to find books? How do we find your books?
I have a website called anovelmind.com, and there's a database in it with well over 1,000 books. It's a searchable database, so you can, if you're looking for a book with LGBTQ rep, or a book on ADHD for a picture book, say, with ADHD, or if you're looking for a young adult book on eating disorders, you can enter those search for, and you find the books that you want. And there's a weekly blog that we have as well with like really foremost authors today writing about their own, and it's all neurodiversity and mental health issues, but empathy is such a huge part of that. So you could probably find some good empathy books if you wanted to check out anovelmind.com. And there are also resource pages that an autistic librarian in Texas named Adriana White put together for us. And there's tons of resources there. So that might be one source.
I was going to also recommend WeNeedDiverseBooks.org. They are constantly sharing recommendations, and diversity for them is all kinds of diversity, whether it's physical diversity or, like about mental illness or neurodivergence, all that kind of stuff. So they have a lot of lists and blogs, and they're always sharing books, so I recommend them as well.
I'm going to put a plug in for the Westport Library because they do have a link on their website that lists diverse books for kids by age range and by category, and they also include mental health topics there, so you should check that out too.
Which is also a good plug for booksellers and librarians in general. I feel like if you go to a bookstore or a library and you say, hey, I'm looking for this, they should be able to pass you a book. So you don't have to stay up late, just show up and they'll direct you.
I've done the research for you.
I'm from PA. I'm at my local bookstore.
Hi, so I am furious at Scholastic, and I actually think you should be saying their name, and I think that you should be talking to people about what they're doing. I don't think it's like a don't say this. I think that's exactly what everyone needs to know. So my question is, as authors, what do you see that you can do politically teachers are under fire, right? Librarians are under fire. So what do you see as your role in supporting teachers, supporting librarians, supporting public schools so that they can continue to have your books available for all students?
Well, I can say with the local elections coming up, one thing we all can do is to reach out to the people who are running for election and ask them what their stance on these issues are and make sure to vote accordingly. I think we all need to take a stand and do more than just say, online, like, hey, we support not banning. Like, you have to actually physically do things now. So that, like I mentioned earlier, showing up to meetings, if there's votes, in your town, in your state, participate, because we need legislation to pass to fix a lot of these issues. And we also need to put pressure on our publishers. I know there's a letter going around now for that Scholastic issue, which anybody who's not aware, essentially the book fairs that you're all probably familiar with, they created a separate box called, I forget what it's called, but essentially featuring all the diverse titles for all the elementary schools, and you have to opt in or opt out to those books. So any school in the country could just be like, I'll just opt out of the books that are diverse, and that's wrong. And if you look at the list of books, a lot of these books aren't even, they're just like about just being nice and kind.
No one's reading the books. No one's reading the books.
And so anyway, there is a letter that one of the Scholastic authors put out, and other authors are signing it, and that's going to be sent to Scholastic. And so there is, I think that's another thing us authors can do. But yeah, maybe other people can speak to other ideas.
There's an author named Phil Bildner who is very vocal about change and what you can do on a local level. And what he is constantly recommending is show up to your school board and voice your opinion. So that is something that you can do.
It's amazing how effective that is, too. I was a school board president for 6 years in Wisconsin, and we would plead for people to come to the meetings and voice their concerns, because if one person came and voiced one concern, we'd have to listen to that one person. So, showing up has so much more effect than you can imagine. There's that old saying about, if you think one person can't change the world, try being in a closed room with one little mosquito or whatever. It's like, you can make a difference even if you're one person, if you go and share your voice with your local, especially with local, it starts local, with your local government and school boards especially.
What inspired you to start writing children's books?
Those are two of my creative writing students, so can we just say hi to them, because I'm so happy they're here. I guess I'll go. I fell into children's books, because when I was your age, we were talking about this yesterday, there was kind of a gap with adult and children's books. It kind of went away for a little bit, so I was like in 7th grade reading Interview with a Vampire and Misery, and like missing a lot that was happening, probably thankfully, but like just there was that gap. So when I went to major in creative writing and go to grad school and all that, I was like, I'm gonna write a very serious and important adult novel, and I wasn't that great at that. And then I was like getting rejections forever, and I finally was like, I just want to write the kind of book that made me happy when I was a kid. And then that's what I did, and that ended up being The Stitchers. So write what you love.
I kind of also fell into it. I was an English major in college and took creative writing classes, and then I took a literature class my senior year of college that was about reading children's literature. And so it kind of reminded me how much I loved books for kids. I hadn't read them myself since I was a kid myself. And our final assignment in that class was to write a chapter of our own children's book. And that it kind of from there on, that's all I wanted to write. So.
And for me, I used to be like a business writer, and I wrote for magazines, and I never thought I could write a book, but I was volunteering in my kids' library, and I was reading all these amazing books. I was supposed to be shelving them, but I kept on like, ooh, this is interesting. I got so into it, and it really just changed what I wanted to do. So the minute I got a chance, I switched to writing for kids.
I started after taking a continuing education class at School of Visual Arts in children's book illustration. My teacher at the time, this was in 2020. No, not 2020. 2001. And my teacher was Brian Floca, who went on to win the Caldecott Medal. And it was like something that I had always wanted to do, just take an illustration class. And from there, I met David Levithan, came to talk to my class, and I ran into both of them on the street afterwards, and I realized, I was like, it's not just a love of children's illustration that I love, it's the storytelling. And in a way, my brain is sort of like still at a 12-year-old level. So it's really the kind of story that I always sort of lean towards in general. I still read children's literature for fun, so.
So unlike everybody else on this panel, I was a math and physics major. And so that just tells you, girls, that it doesn't matter what you study. If you have a story to tell, you can tell it, and you can become a children's book author.
On that happy note, I'm going to thank all of you so much for your time today. And for the audience, books are available in the Kamansky room for sale, and the authors will be signing at the table right here. And now we're going to start our second panel of the day.